Hi, we continue in 2 Samuel 21 after the powerful story of Rizpah's witness to the dead bodies left to hang there for months and months that leads David to gather their bones and give them a proper burial. Now we get to a very different kind of story, one of two lists of David's warriors, and what they're all only celebrated for throughout the list you can see on the right side of the screen. The blue first part in chapter 21 and in chapter 23 is for being killing machines. As you can see there, one of the things that connects them is the use of the Hebrew word nakim, to strike down or to kill, 6 times in the first list and 5 times in the second list. So after a story that showed that killing innocent grandchildren did not assuage the wrath of Yahweh that had caused the famine, now we get this further list. And one has to ask a number of questions about that. These lists plainly fit into the chiasm very tightly here, but they're also saying something very different. And as we've been looking at, and the evidence I've been showing is starting in the introductory video to this unit, showing how many of the words, especially in the Psalms here in 22 and 23, are much later words, not found in the Torah very often and not found in the Deuteronomistic history, the text from Deuteronomy all the way through 2 Kings. As well as the fact that the story we saw in chapter 21 about the Gibeonites referred to incidents in Joshua, which is certainly written from the time of Josiah in roughly the 630s or so. But are these lists from the same time period, or did editors from that later time period after exile or in the time of Josiah simply incorporate them in? And if they did, why would they be here? Because there's a number of details that a later audience can't possibly have reason to want to know. The names of these obscure warriors and the names of the obscure giants. But there's also hidden in here a couple of interesting things about David, and maybe that's what's going on here, as well as a couple of interesting things about the details that call us back to other elements. So we'll look today at this one, and I'll have a separate video on the other one, which, as you can see, is much longer. It's 32 verses and describes 30 people, whereas this is just a list of 4. And so as we look at the key words here, you can see in the section here that struck down, war again, Philistines. It's almost could be presented just simply in like 4 verses, like a poem, but it's not quite that. 3 of them are named and 1 of them is not. But when we look at the parallel, which is the entire chapter 23, we see again how much struck down, warriors, and then the emphasis on the 3. But all about the Philistines, and certainly at this point in the story, it's anachronistic. The Philistines have not been the concern in the chronology for quite a long time, and that's something that leads people like Halpern to suggest the emphasis on the Philistines was to underscore at the end that although David had worked for the Philistines and hidden from Saul there in 1 Samuel, and then in the end he was convincingly against the Philistines. But that's not really the emphasis, and David isn't really the actor here, as we're about to see. And one of the elements that's also interesting is who killed Goliath, because we'll see Goliath again in this section. So let's just jump right into our scene here. And as my note below has from Halpern, suggesting what I was just hinting at, but we can hear it in his words. So as I note, as with the fight against the Philistines in chapter 5, verse 19 and following, just after David takes the reign of Israel, so here, after the last member of the house of Saul is defeated. And then Halpern adds, this, quote, juxtaposition too indicates a certain sensitivity to the charge that David colluded with Philistines against Saul and his family. This is why the chapter stresses conflict with champions directly or indirectly associated with Gath, David's primary Philistine affiliate. As you can see down below here in verse 20, war again at Gath, the home of Goliath. So let's look at some of the details and highlight not just the elements of the 4 killings, which you probably don't care about, but something is telling us about David, certainly with an eye toward 1 Kings, and we didn't see any of that earlier in the chapter. So Philistines never end, went to war again, and we see the phrase as a refrain throughout this section here. With Israel, notice not with Israel and Judah. Judah in the entire appendix, chapters 21 to 24, was only there in verse 2 when it was mentioned Israel and Judah. Now Israel will stand for the entire people. What's at issue here is not the divided monarchy, as it will be in the next generation after Solomon. So David went down with his servants, or with his slaves, literally slaves and brothers here, framing with verse 22 at the end of that, as you can see down here on the right side. They fought against the Philistines, and David grew weary, literally faint, as in 16:14. And as Pinsky notes, it seems precisely unlike the indefatigable boy and man we have known. And yet we did see that throughout the Absalom situation, David was passive. He wasn't necessarily weary, but he was passive. And I tried to explain that throughout that sequence of chapters as an intentional strategy to get Absalom killed to set up Solomon to be on the throne, as we'll see in the first chapters of 1 Kings. But this is something different. This is a narrator telling us something about his condition that we need to trust the narrator that it's true. So David is weary here, and we'll see in the beginning of 1 Kings, he can't get warm and needs a woman to be his bed warmer. So we can see the beginning of the decline acknowledged here. So David grew weary, and then we hear the first of these battles. Ishbi-benob literally means my dwelling is not at Nob, whatever about that, I suppose. As Clement notes, and as I've been noting throughout this section, he did his doctoral dissertation on this unit, so he has paid a lot of close attention to it. He notes that the 5 Philistine giants are killed, including Goliath of 1 Samuel 17, corresponding to the other 5s, the cities of the Philistines, the tumors, the mice, and David's stones. And he says, quote, the conquest of Goliath and the cutting off of his head is David's initial victory, and the overcoming of the 4 giants as the concluding report in the finale go together to portray the total overthrow of the all-powerful enemy with his 5 kings. The only problem with Clement's note is that Goliath is named twice, and so there still only are 4, but maybe that's the reason to make a 5 by naming him twice. Then we see this phrase, one of the descendants of the giants, or literally a child of the giants, and the term there is Harapha, but the plural of Rapha is Raphaim, and we see a number of times as spelled this way, as you can see. A number of times we see a people called the Raphaim or the Valley of the Raphaim, which could equally be translated as giants. Some people here simply translate this as one of the Raphaim, like it's a family member, but it has ha in the front, the, which is what leads most translators to see it as a noun and not as an individual noun as giant rather than ethnic noun as a group of people. It normally wouldn't have a the in front of it. So it seems to be about their height and their strength, as we see in the description here. But when we see the description whose spear weighed 300 shekels of bronze, maybe that reminds us of over here, where we noted that Goliath's spear was described as 600 shekels of bronze back in 1 Samuel 17. So although this is not about Goliath, that's a strange parallel, even though it's not identical. Obviously, iron versus bronze and 300 versus 600 shekels, but it's an oddly specific description of all the things one might say about him. Notice it doesn't say how tall he is. It's simply talking about his spear, whereas as you can see on the left side of the chart here on the right side of the screen, other descriptions of Goliath in addition to his spear that highlight that, but we only see this about Ishbi-benob. And it was fit out with new weapons, and said he would kill David. Notice it's indirect speech. We don't hear the direct taunting that we heard back in 1 Samuel 17 of Goliath that really set up the emotional confrontation there. This is much less personal. And then we hear about Abishai. Again, David is saved by Abishai, the chief hitman, son of Zeruiah. And let's look back at the sons of Zeruiah, who David said was too powerful for me, and note that Abishai is the last one standing. Although Joab still stands, as you can see in this quote from 1 Kings, which you haven't gotten to, David will tell Solomon on his deathbed to bring Joab, not let his gray hairs go down to Sheol in peace. And we already saw that Asahel died and at the hand of Abner, and now Abishai, who's described repeatedly as the man of blood, is the one who not only comes to David's aid here, but the one that will connect with the warriors in chapter 23, as we can see here, the only one that's in both places. So Abishai, named again, came to his aid, or literally his help, Ezar, as in Ezar Kenegdo, the help of the Adam back in Genesis 2, as my note has there, but we see it for another number of other times. But David is in need of help. In contrast to the young David who challenged Goliath and was not afraid at all, despite the fact that he was a young man and was not an experienced warrior, now David's weariness leads Abishai to come without asking permission at all, but just to jump in, attack the Philistine, and kill him. Just as David did to Goliath, although this is, again, not yet Goliath. Then David's men swore to him, notice collectively here. And we see very little swearing, but from other people. We hear about swearing to Yahweh and Yahweh swearing, but very little swearing people to people as this. But it echoes the theme we saw in 21:2 about the oath and the swearing to protect the Gibeonites back in the Joshua story. But this recalls the flip side in 19:8, as my note below has, where Joab swore in the context of getting David moving again, which is, he said, I swear that if you don't get moving, all the people will abandon you. And now Abishai and his men swear the other way around. You shall not go out, so you do not quench the lamp of Israel. And that phrase, quench the lamp, is exactly like 1 Samuel 3:3, although New RSV doesn't translate it that way. The phrase not yet gone out here is exactly the same verb. So there the lamp of God had not yet gone out in the time of Eli, and Samuel was lying in the temple of Yahweh. Obviously, this is not the temple in Jerusalem. This is the very beginning of 1 Samuel. So there's the reference to the lamp of God that is not extinguished, and Samuel will be the one designated by Yahweh to continue to keep that lamp lit. But now the men say to him that David shall not quench the lamp of Israel, which is suggesting at this point the lamp of Israel is there existing in the face of the Philistines. As Falkman notes below, their wish is the counterpart of the perilous situation at the beginning of 1 Samuel, as I was just noting, when the corruption at Shiloh endangered the nation and the lamp of the temple almost went out at the very hour Samuel was to receive his call from God himself during the night. This is the only time we hear about lamp of Israel, though. The term for lamp, Ner, also refers to Abner's father, Ner, that we saw back in 1 Samuel 14:50. And we'll also see the phrase in the psalm that we see in chapter 22. So not only is there a chiastic linking, but we see a number of things that link these pieces within the larger chiasm of chapters 21 to 24. So that's that one. And there's another one that really has nothing to say about it, but it just makes you wonder why it's there. The names are given, but no specifications are given, so there's nothing to be said about that. Now there's another one, another battle with the Philistines at Gob, and Elhanan, son of Jare-Orjim, the Bethlehemite, killed Goliath the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam, and that's what we get the connection here with a shaft of the spear like a weaver's beam. Could there be more than one Goliath? The Gittite, almost certainly not. Some people suggest, as my note from Osman has below, that Elhanan was David's original name, but that's special pleading, one might think. Halpern suggests that Elhanan is named here as the one who actually killed Goliath, and that later, after David was famous, they injected him back into the story in 1 Samuel 17 to give him a powerful origin story. We'll never know the historical truth about that, but whoever edited these pieces into place did not hesitate to have two versions of how Goliath the Gittite was killed. And notice here it's not Goliath who's taunting or anything. There's no question of Goliath wanting to kill David. He's just named that with another battle. And before we can think about it much further, there's another one. And this one is described in a bizarre way. It's not only bizarre in terms of human physiognomy, but why do we need to know? It has nothing to do with how dangerous he might be, but here it is. There was again war at Gath, where there was a man of great size, although the phrase, the assonant phrase here, Medin, Medan, both words only here in Samuel, and as Falkman suggests, can mean an expert in derision or an agitator here, so it doesn't necessarily refer to size, as it could be to his fierceness. And had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number. Why do we know that? Some later Christian interpreters, and what I also think is special pleading, want to argue backwards from the number 24 in the book of Revelation, but we have no sense of the number 24 being an important number in the Deuteronomistic history, or really in the Hebrew Bible, despite the fact that we associate it with 24 hours of the day. Why would that have any correlation with the number of fingers and toes on the hands of an unnamed giant? So that's just a mystery. We have no idea why that's there. But he taunts Israel. Goliath is said not to taunt Israel. He did. And he's killed by an interesting character, Jonathan, son of David's brother Shimei. We obviously know another Jonathan, David's friend, Saul's son. We did not know that David had a son named Shimei, and Shimei was also somebody we saw earlier as someone who was against David. So all these characters we know nothing about at all, but there they are. And then we get this summary. These 4 were descended or children of the giants in Gath. They fell by the hands of David and his servants. But notice, even as the story says, none of them fell by the hand of David. Just when David was going up to them, Abishai intervened, and perhaps David might have killed another, but then his nephew intervened. So it certainly seems like we're seeing that David has reached near the end of his time, and when we see the warriors on the other side, we'll see more hints about that. So I will come back to the psalm after we look at the list of the 30 and the special group of the 3 next time. See you there for that. Bye-bye.